they're all like these people, whether they're Freemasons, whether they're Zionists, whether they're Marxists, they're all working together to make this thing happen. Like it's almost like they're stagehands on a production called Apocalypse, right? And you're like everybody. It's like this Broadway thing that everyone's going, watch the Zionist apocalypse. It's better than Cats, right? And they're all just working together to make it happen. And it's just
but if they do want to make it happen, it's going to happen. He kind of scared me, saying, well, they will release a real one.
No, okay, that's possible. But I want to get into, I think when they want people to get sick, they crank that 5G up.
That's a great point as well. I mean, and I'm sure your audience is well aware of that, but that's a legitimate concern for like you're saying, for when that is actually turned up to a point where people can have immediate symptoms, like things to the point where like your skin is burning and you feel like you have a fever. But I want to point out though that, I think that they obviously see that we see this, right? And so whether or not they choose to release something or not, I think it's obvious that they know we're watching what's happening. And so I think that leads to the reality that something will have to be done that's far more extreme than just feigning something, which makes me genuinely worried about this, And there was another point I was going to make, but I kind of lost it. So go ahead.
I've been with you. That happens to me a lot. So you're a good-looking guy, dressed very well on the show. I'm glad you're here, dressed, looking like that. Because I like to talk to people that have class and ask them, you brought up, are you into train theory? I think we've talked this before, but anytime I can hear about it, I'd love to hear about it. Are you a train theorist? Are you a germ theorist?
Well, it's an interesting question because I'm in the place right now where I've extensively researched. I've interviewed people, from terrain. I've interviewed Kaufman like 3 times. And it's interesting to me that I personally feel that neither side seems to meet all of what explains it for me, which irritates everybody, which is typically how I end up in these positions, like the left-right paradigm. And I'm like, well, they're both wrong and everyone hates on you. I think that right now germ theory is not adding up for me in a lot of easy ways to prove. That's what Kaufman first opened my mind to that. Where I started, seeing that, there's some of these issues like isolation, Koch's postulates has never been met in a lot of these different circumstances, if not ever. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's crazy to me. And you can prove these things despite all the screams about everything. But then, and there's a lot more to that, but then I come over to the train theory because of that. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting, right? There's a lot. And I would argue more from that side that adds up for me. The idea of what real health actually is, and not just pharmaceuticals and medicine, but like the idea of keeping your body actually healthy in the terrain. But there's also parts of that I don't think doesn't add up for me. Okay. And I've even had on an interview with Kaufman, he kind of admitted to one point that there's some of these things that are just unanswered still. And so I'm like, okay, so in my opinion then, I don't think either of them have explained it yet. And so that frustrates people that have just decided that terrain is the thing and that you can't have any other opinion. I think that there's honest people in that conversation, a lot of them, that genuinely want to find out what's going on and genuinely believe that's the case. But I also see a very alarming element in that conversation that I see kind of like the 9/11 conversation, where if you had a minor disagreement, which, I shouldn't call it minor, there's big story, but if you get into disagreement at one of the data points, like planes, no planes.
I agree.
You were like, you're not allowed in this conversation. It's like, hold on, can't we all just we all agree the government's involved, right? We all agree there's this problem here, but you get like boxed out of it. And so that's even while I'm like over the top about how, every time I talk about this, I'm like, whether you think it exists or not, and that's very possible, they just want me to come out and be like, germs don't exist, and you're right. And it's like, I don't agree with that. And if I don't say that, then I'm somehow controlled opposition. Yeah. Like, that's a really faulty way of thinking, Go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think there's new. Oh, look at this. Bird flu is rampant in animals. Humans ignore it at their own peril. Come on, bro. You're just. It's just manifestation. That's what they're doing. If you someone should do an actual doc on the slow rolling out of COVID. The step-by-step how they got you to do it, and it's the same thing they did with HIV. They get you to buy it into somebody else, and once you buy it into somebody else, and they get a sense, okay, everyone's buying it, that it's only goes against Asians or Chinese. Once you buy that, bang, all of a sudden they're like, oh, dude, this white person got it too. Oh, no, I could get it. And now you're fucked. Same thing with HIV. Once they convince you it was a gay man's disease, you're like, oh, dude, these guys
they have an asshole type of shit.
Then it's like, oh, no, I get to. Now you're fucked because you already believed in it. And we can get into how they proved HIV exists, which is basically through circumstantial evidence. It's based on these enzymes. They never found the exact virus.
Right.
They just find the enzymes. They're like, well, if the enzymes are here, that means it's there. But what later on they came out and they admitted all these viruses, I'm doing a lot of aggressive air quotes right now. All these viruses produce these enzymes. It was all built on a giant lie.
I actually genuinely believe, and Mikovits is one of the first people that turned me on to this. I interviewed her like right in the beginning of the COVID-19 conversation. That I think we're talking about the same thing. SARS-CoV-2 does not equal, if that even exists, COVID-19. And then you have this whole conversation about HIV and AIDS. It's the same game, which right now we're proving, and I think Ben was also clear, that we're talking about a vaccine-induced the same situation. HIV is just a autoimmunity thing, right? So we're talking about, or rather, AIDS, what they say is an autoimmunity thing. So I actually think that was the same thing. We're talking about a vaccine-induced problem that they blame on whatever they say was there. And I still argue that there could be something. And what I was going to say before is there's other possibilities here about what we could be talking about. To bring it back to the terrain point, is one of the things I brought up with Kaufman was like, okay, well, there's a huge element of the terrain part that believes bacteria is real, but viruses aren't. Okay, so bacteria can cause symptoms. Bacteria, if certain bacterial infections can spread and other people can get sick. Okay. Bacteria have proteins, which proteins like the spike protein. Okay, so then let's just get away with the word and acknowledge there could be something they're working on that could get you sick based on your own theories. Or how about virus-sized transistors and nanotechnology, which I've talked about with Charles Lieber in 2011, highlighting a virus-sized transistor that can this stuff is all, at least they claim, is real. But I'm open to the idea that it could be a lie. But don't those meet a possibility? So it's like the idea that we just brush the conversation away as not real when there are things that actually meet what you could be calling it. Just get away from the word virus. So I think that's also a problem there. And I think the HIV AIDS, and it's a very real, they're giving people things that they're experimenting with. That is obviously what COVID-19 was. And I think that was happening back then too. And Mikovits and others have been telling us that for a long time.
I'm so into that right now that what COVID, what terrain theory was when it was discovered or what's the word I'm looking for? I'm functionally illiterate, so the word's escaping me. But it's like when it was basically made. God, that's the worst word possible. But
thought up.
They basically they didn't have all this technology now. Like when you talk about virus-sized nanobots, they're spraying the skies, guys. What are they? They find these microbiomes. Like we all agree on that. Even if you're a terrain theorist, you believe in microbiomes. Couldn't they weaponize that like a motherfucker?
Mm-hmm. They're clearly working on something. This is what I said the other day. I think we all acknowledge they're doing something in these labs, whether, gain of function or whatever we're talking about. So, should we just disregard that they're doing something in there because you don't like the word that we're calling what they're putting out? It's like, that seems really irresponsible to me. It's like we have to acknowledge that they're doing something. And it could very well be something that has nothing to do with pathogens, but they're still doing something. And I think that we're still being experimented on. And I think that's a dangerous way to play that conversation. But again, genuinely think that there's something to what they're talking about with the terrain theory from the honest side of that conversation. People should not ignore it. I argue that eventually that'll be some kind of a leading element to how the full picture comes out from that very point, I think.
So